touch on a couple of the questions. First, about experience. You know, there's one statutory requirement for the Attorney General, and it's not that they have served in the legislature. It's that they have 10 years active practice in litigation in the state of Connecticut. Because you're not hiring somebody to represent you in the legislature, you're hiring somebody to supervise lawyers who are representing you in court. And there's a big difference between serving in the legislature and supervising a staff of some 200 lawyers. And I'll tell you this, as your Attorney General, I ain't going to go to court for you. That's what I've done in my career. It's not going to be every case. But on the important cases where critical public interest is at stake, I think you deserve to have your lawyer be your voice in court for you and out on the courthouse steps advocating for you. And I want you to ask yourself this. Let me turn the question around for all of you. When you go to the ballot box in August or November, and you're thinking about what's important to you in your lawyer, just ask yourself, are you going to be thinking about how well the Attorney General can work with the legislature? Or are you going to be thinking about how well is this person going to protect my family? How well is this person going to protect my kids? Can I count on this person to stand up for what's right because that's what they've done? You know, there's a question on there about special interests. Should the Attorney General make decisions based on special interests? Well, I'm proud to say I'm the only candidate up here that has rejected any contributions from lobbyists. Because you can't go into court being the people's lawyer if you got your hand out to lobbyists, right? There's a question on there about prescription drugs and what we can do to lower the price of prescription drugs. You know, prescription drugs have increased over 200% since 2008. 20% of people who take prescription medications report that they have skipped a dose or lowered the dose because they can't afford it. One of the things we need to do is to have an anti-price gouging law against the pharmaceutical companies in Connecticut so that the Attorney General can go after pharmaceutical companies that increase their prices unconscionably. You're only going to get that through somebody who knows how to litigate these types of cases. So what I would say to you is, you know, this is an office that we can't afford to lose. Do you agree with me? You know, it's a tough environment in Connecticut. I hope we win the governor's office. I think we're going to hold on to it. I hope we keep the legislature. There are some candidates here tonight who I hope are going to win their races for the legislature. But if we don't, we better have a Democratic Attorney General who's standing there and knows how to fight. Because on issues like collective bargaining, on issues like environmental protection, on issues relating to the Trump administration, those fights are happening in federal court. And you better send a lawyer to court for you who knows how to do that work. Thanks.
The question is it critical to have experience in elective office or in state government? And I think it's absolutely critical. The one thing I share with Dick Blumenthal and George Jepson is that we all served in the legislature, we all served on the Judiciary Committee, and George was its chairman before I was. And it's because in that role where you figure out what the job is and what it isn't. The Attorney General is not a prosecutor, doesn't have criminal jurisdiction, that's the Chief State's Attorney. He's not a day-to-day trial attorney. The Attorney General leads 200 lawyers, and it's not just his hard power, the ability to sue on behalf of the state and defend state agencies, but it's also his management of the soft power. Dick Blumenthal and George Jepson understand that better than anybody. I've watched George move the instruments of state government to push through a settlement that he had to execute on behalf of the state because Governor Rowland abrogated the rights of state employees. It was almost $500 million in exposure. George had to get that through the legislature, through the governor, and make it happen. I've watched him work the instruments of state government on claims, for example, when the state faces tremendous exposure from people suing the state. And Mike's right. You know, the Attorney General has an important role to help the legislature interpret the law and to provide guidance. He has an important role to work with the governor's office, the executive branch, in defending those agencies. And the Attorney General's office, because of the nuts and bolts of what they do, child protection, child support enforcement, collections, they're in those courthouses every day, those assistant attorney generals. And you need an AG who understands and has a relationship with the judiciary to make sure that they are effective on behalf of people of this state and really sensitive to the cost constraints that they have today. in our court system. But I said earlier that this is a moment for the battle tested, and that's when experience really makes a difference because of the extraordinary challenges that we face. I came face to face with one of them just a couple of months ago in Stanford. Miriam Martinez is a mom. She's undocumented. She's my neighbor in Stanford, and she has a daughter who's diabetic. She's an immigrant, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement targeted Miriam and said, leave, get out, or we'll deport you and leave your daughter behind. So I was asked to give her some legal help and to go to her apartment and to be there for her as part of a human shield because ICE was circling the block. I had a chance after to meet Miriam, and when I met her, I looked down and I saw her ankle bracelet. It's an ugly piece of metal and plastic, and it has a loudspeaker on it, so ICE can talk to you. I cannot tell you how chilling it is to see someone in your own community shackled like that. That is not who we are. That's not the world that I want my kids to grow up in. And that is why we fight. Thank you.
We have a panel of attorneys. We're going to take the final 3 minutes, starting with Representative Tom for a closing. Closing arguments.
So you don't want us to pick one of these?
You can, and you can finish up.
So, things are different now. And maybe I was a little slow in figuring it out. But the morning after the election, November 2016, my daughter Eleanor, she's 11, she shook me. And she woke me up, and I looked at her, opened one eye, and I said, "What's up, Eleanor?" And she said, "Pa, what happened?" You know, and since that time, and I couldn't find the words, right, when she asked me that question. And since that time, I've had a real opportunity to think long and hard about what it means to be Democrat and what it means to be American. And for me, it means that my parents came to Hartford, Connecticut with almost nothing. And they were able to open a small Chinese restaurant, first on Park Street in Hartford and then in Wethersfield. And if you're from this area, it was the Sampan near the A&P for almost 20 years. And I worked side by side with my parents in that restaurant. They worked 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, just so I could stand here tonight. And now they're in Glastonbury on Chestnut Hill Road. They still work extremely hard. We have a business in Manchester, as Chairman Pohl knows, and my dad's there fixing the plumbing and fixing the roof. I wish he would stop. But nothing has ever been easy for us. And we've had to fight for every inch. And that's why I formed an exploratory committee for statewide office, including Attorney General. I mentioned it earlier, but if you're like us and you come from working people, or like my dad, you know, I talked about Miriam, but I didn't mention that my own father was given the very same order Miriam was given almost 50 years ago in Hartford, Connecticut, to leave or get deported. But we were allowed to stay. And so, if you're like us, you're taking this moment very personally. And you know what it is to suffer hate and bigotry and to have people come after your family. And so that's why I'm here tonight. I have a great job in legislature. I've been able to accomplish things on behalf of the people of the state that we can all be proud of. But this is a moment for our fight. And if you feel as I do, this is a moment to get in that fight. And again, I hope to earn your support. Thank you.
Thank you to Mike, and to Tony, and to Charlie. I want to tell you a quick story about a moment that really changed my life. I mentioned earlier that I was a union organizer, and how I would have to go around to the homes right around this time of night to meet with women in their homes, to try and get them to tell me what was going on. And I want to tell you about this one woman. I showed up at her house. She lived in Gilroy, California. You all may know Gilroy is the garlic capital of the world. And you get off the highway and it literally just like hits you. And so I pull up to her house, and it's this tiny little house. And I knock on the door, and a young woman in high school answers the door. She said, "My mom's just finishing up in the kitchen. She'll be out in a second." So I go in. It's this like postage stamp living room, crucifix by the door, glass figurines on the shelf. I sit down on the couch. It's spotless, right? She comes out after working in the kitchen. And she sits down next to me, and she's shaking, visibly shaking. And her daughter was there because she was going to interpret for us, because her mom only spoke Spanish. And so she's just sitting there, and she looks at her daughter. She says something in Spanish, and her daughter says, "My mom says that if she talks to you, she could lose her job. If she loses her job, she could lose her house. If she loses the house, she's going to have to pull me out of school. And the whole reason we're in this neighborhood is so I can go to school here." And her mom starts crying on the couch. Now, I'm 23 years old. I don't know what to do. After a couple of minutes, she gathers herself. She says something to her daughter, and her daughter says, "My mom says that if she doesn't say anything, nothing will change." And she, in her living room that night, laid out the entire story of what was happening at work. Within a couple months, she had organized her entire unit at the hospital into a labor union, and she was sitting across a corporate boardroom from corporate voters negotiating the first ever contract that set the standard for wages and work conditions in hospitals for her unit in Northern California. And the reason I tell you that story is because I didn't realize then how much courage it took in that moment for her to do what she did. But we are at a moment now where we're all being summoned to have a little courage. And I know that every candidate up here feels that way. I know all of you feel that way. That's why you're here. And that's why I felt compelled to run for Attorney General. I don't know if I'll have as much courage as she had, but I know that I'll fight really hard for you. And I hope you know, based on what I've done in my life, that you can count on me when we're in a hard spot. Thanks very much.
I want to thank everybody. I also want to thank the chairs of the DTCs for putting this together. It does help us a lot when there is sort of a gathering of us together, as opposed to, trying to fit three meetings in one night and sort of hopping from one to the other. So I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all of your attentions and patience with us. I want to just end with a why am I running? I have been on unpaid leave since December 8th. Thank you, that's October 8th. December 8th. I've got a great job that I love. Why would I be leaving a job I love and spending time with you guys? Well, a little over a year ago, I boarded a bus for Washington, D.C. And I joined hundreds of thousands of women and men marching on Washington and part of the Women's March. And we were marching, all of us. I have to say, who was there? Who was there? Yes. It was a little bit of a family reunion. It was a little bit of a dance party. It was a political protest. But it was in many ways life-changing. But we were marching because we were very worried about what the election of November 2016 meant for us and for our country. And boy, were we right. As this year has gone on, I have become increasingly concerned about what's been happening in Washington, and increasingly appalled, and have spent the time saying, what can I do? I was in elected office for 9 years. My last term ended in 2015, and I'll be honest, I had not intended to run again. And really spending time saying, okay, how can I make a difference? And the Monday after Thanksgiving, I received a call from my boss, George Jepson. I was George Jepson's statewide campaign manager in 2010 for his first run for AG. And he said, Claire, I'm not ready for re-election. And don't ask me, I have no clue what he's going to do. But that said, spending some time doing that, I said, okay, here's the answer. Here's the answer to the question I've been asking myself all year. How can I make a difference? I am the only candidate with any experience in the office, and I have 2 decades of it. I've fought, I've negotiated, I've done every aspect of that work in that office. And I hope I get your support, because I will be one heck of an effective AG. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. Right down the road, there's a gubernatorial forum, and I appreciate you coming to listen to us speak. We all of us go to many town committees, and to be honest, a lot of times when after the gubernatorial candidates finish their speak, there's many questions. Oftentimes, our ladies and gentlemen can represent, when we finish, there's very few questions. So I think people are trying to understand really what we do. And 9 weeks ago, I was preparing to run for re-election to the state senate. That was my goal. I was getting ready to file my committee, the standard state senate committee, and all of a sudden, to the surprise of pretty much everyone in this room, unless there's a select few that didn't know, George Jepson decided not to run. At that point, I had to make the decision. I've committed my life to public service. Should I take this leap? Should I try to go for the job of Attorney General? I know it was a big challenge, but I thought it over and I said to myself, this would be a great opportunity to try to help more people statewide. So I made the decision. There's no guarantees I'm going to win, I realize that. But I said to myself, I've committed 26 years to public service. I want to try to really represent the whole state, represent you as your lawyer statewide. Will I be successful? Who knows? But I've emphasized to you my experience. I've emphasized to you my legal experience, my political experience, and my courage of my convictions. I'll just say I've always worked hard in my life. I even did somewhere here, it was in the paper a few years or so ago, I chased down a bank robber. You can read about it. Okay? My wife questions the logic there, but that's who I am. It was an instinctual act. I moved to help the people and that person in that bank. So that's an example of who I am. I hope you folks will consider me during the convention and delegate process. Thank you very much.
So in my private practice, I usually represent companies, people in business disputes. But a couple of years ago, I found myself in a completely different situation. I was in immigration court in Hartford, representing a 14-year-old boy named Daniel, who came over to this country from Honduras. And this was a couple of years ago. This was before DACA. The reason that DACA, if you remember why President Obama signed DACA, was there was this influx of young, unaccompanied minors coming into this country. And they weren't running here for a better educational opportunity. They weren't running for a better economic opportunity. They were literally running for their lives. That was the case with Daniel. His father had been killed in a blood venture. His older brother had been killed. If he had stayed in Honduras, he was either going to be a murderer or a murder victim. And my firm and I, went to court, and we ended up getting an order for him to stay him, ironically enough, not because of his status, but because of his mother's. She was in this country already, and she was a domestic abuse victim. And we were able to use her cooperation with the legal authorities here to get him status to stay in this country. But I tell you that story for 2 reasons, because it highlights 2 things, I think. First, we've forgotten something. I know I did. I'm the son of school teachers, second generation Italian immigrant Americans in this country. And I've forgotten what this country means to people, particularly the most desperate among us. People like Daniel, who literally risked their lives to cross the border. But not just that, and I mentioned this earlier, it's the power of the law to do good, to to change people's lives forever. Daniel's a senior in high school in Waterbury. He's graduating this year. He's a dreamer. He wants to go to college. Guess what he wants to do after college? He wants to be a lawyer. With your help, I hope in a few years, several years from now, that I'm working with him in the office of the Attorney General's office. And thank you all for coming out tonight. This was fantastic. Thank you so much for everybody being on behalf of all of us. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Is this on? So this is my town. This is my town. I get to speak at the end. First of all, I want to thank everybody, the candidates, all of you. Whether or not you live in Glastonbury, we left our schedule. You're more than welcome back to any of our meetings. The thing I said at the last session is that this may not be enough time for you to really get to know these candidates. But if you want to know more about them, contact them, invite them to your home, have a house party with a few of your friends. You don't need a lot of people. 5 or 10 people, you can make a difference, and you can get to personally know these individuals. This is an exciting time. We all have stories. That the house parties are the best ways. My story of my granddaughter was 10, Sophia, the day after the election, said to me when I told her that Hillary had lost, said, "What's going to happen to my country?" So when you want to know whether or not you want to do one more thing for the Democratic Party or for your neighbors, you have to get involved. Nancy Wyman said to me, or to people over the time, she got involved because she spoke out. So that's what we're asking you to do. And thank you for coming. Thank you for my cohorts here. There's another session for if your friends didn't make it. We have a session like this coming up at the beginning of March, and we start with a similar format.